In October of 2007, the house was empty. The tenant had moved out.
We drove up to it. She says, "There's somebody standing in that window." I said, "No, that's impossible."
The scene was strange, more like a staged incident. There was a body in the room and 2 notebooks. She had been writing a journal. "To whoever finds my body, please bury me in the New Durham Town Cemetery."
And that's where the story of Linda Bishop ended.
She was enormously independent.
People were attracted to her.
She liked to be involved with people.
She was a wonderful mother. She loved Katie to death.
It's such an odd thing that no one knew there was this person in that house.
It just doesn't make sense to be barely existing.
I thought, okay, this is a suicide. But the more I learned about her, I realized this isn't a suicide at all.
She had quit her job, and we packed stuff up and hit the road.
She met this guy, Steve, when she was waitressing.
She was madly in love with him.
She kept talking about the Chinese mafia being after her.
She wrote us several letters, deep, dark, delusional. I didn't want that in my house.
We don't know if there's foul play involved.
I think they were looking for any sort of lead.
She was, in a sense, a prisoner in this house.
She had her apple orchards in the back. She loved it here.
I just counted 270 apples, 22 days at 12 apples a day. That should be enough.
There is my mother, and there is Linda Bishop. Linda Bishop's who I hate.
She was that close to safety and being assisted. Then why didn't she get help?
That last bit of power and freedom she wasn't going to give away.
Dear God, please save me. I'm trying, but I don't know what to do.
Congratulations on the film. I think it's incredibly beautiful. You guys do an amazing job capturing the space, and the recreations of the house are really haunting. It's incredibly well done. So congratulations. Let's hear it one more time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's talk about where this started for you. How did the project start for you? When did you first find out about Linda Bishop's story?
Do you all want to start?
So, yeah, I mean, we had, so Todd and I have produced probably close to about 17 documentaries over the last 16 years, and we had decided that we had wanted to make a film about the homeless, about the severely mentally ill. Todd had a personal experience with a gentleman who broke into a building where Todd lived in his foyer in the middle of winter. And Todd had tried to get him help, had called the police. The police came. He wanted him brought to a shelter. And the police took the man and drove up the road, and several blocks up, the police car stopped, door opened, and the man jumped out into a snowstorm. And from that moment on, we had decided we really wanted to focus on this particular topic. We had read an article about this story, and this story had been covered up in New Hampshire as well. And at that moment, we set out to meet Linda Bishop's sister, Joan Bishop, and Linda's daughter, Caitlin, and began to develop a relationship with them.
It's such an incredible story because in exploring the homeless and the mentally ill, there's so many metaphors that are happening with this woman in terms of how we box people in, we cast them aside, we barely listen to them, and it's fascinating because she's living in this house alone. She is walling herself off from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is kind of going along with that. Is that what sort of captured your attention with Linda's story in specific?
Yeah, it was. I think it was an opportunity for us to do a more artistic kind of documentary. You know, so much in today's world in documentaries, I mean, not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it seems like often you almost expect a lesson from a documentary. You know, you're given a lesson in social activism or a lesson in here's how to fix a problem, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, you know. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think all documentaries have to do that. So we didn't really want to do that with this one. We wanted to actually get you inside her head and make you feel like what it was like a little bit to be in that building with her. So if you see this film in the theater, you're surrounded by the noises she might have heard. You see the things that she might have seen. You experience a little bit of the loneliness, I think. almost the hunger at times, because we do a certain thing with the way that we shot food. We shot a lot of this film with actual film, 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter, Super 16 with different kinds of cameras. And that gives a certain patina, a certain feeling of nostalgia to what you're looking at, a certain beauty.
How did you decide? Excuse me. How did you decide what to shoot for each medium? What made you go for 35, for 16? And I'm sure some is still. The interviews are for the most part video.
Yes,
right?
the interviews are in digital video to feel more immediate. But like the food we shot with Super 16, because while she was imagining food, she had this house had no electricity and no heat. So she'd broken into an abandoned farmhouse in the middle of New Hampshire. And she was sitting there essentially by herself, writing in a diary, looking out the window and dreaming. And she was able to stay alive on apples and water for months in this building with no one knowing she was there. But during this entire time, she kept a diary, and the diary is filled with these metaphors and beautiful things that she sees and things in her head and dreams, and then she starts making recipes and for menus she wants to cook. So we actually cooked every single recipe in that diary, and we decided to shoot that in Super 16, for example, because that has like a patina of old, it feels like an old image. And in that house, you know, unplugged, she has no internet, she had no iPhone, she has no electricity, right? So the only thing she had were old magazines from the 70s of good housekeeping and whatnot, and her memory. So her memory of food would feel older. So when you watch this film, if you can see it, it looks like old, almost food ads from the 70s.
Sort of 70s color
Yes.
feel, yeah.
Yeah.
So what about the 35? Was the 35 for like the sort of shots of inside the house and
Yes,
roaming
the
around?
35 was sort of a more dreamy way of shooting. And
Beautiful,
yeah, so that's why we used the 35.
And Lori, you are narrating as the voice of Linda. What was it like reading her diary entries or her journals?
Well, it's a very humbling experience to be able to bring to life someone who's no longer here, and to have her actual words, to have her deepest thoughts, her most private loves and desires, and they're all within your grasp. And not only are they within your grasp, but her handwriting is right with you. So you're actually feeling the page where she actually was writing these thoughts. So it was just a very profound experience personally. And I identified a great deal with her feeling of being an outsider, of being a renegade, and of being rather betrayed. In her mind, she felt that her perspective was the true one, and that belief was profound. So it was very heavy.
Well, quite often you find that betrayal with from people who are suffering, because already they feel on the outside, and it becomes somewhat embedded, and then it becomes embellished, and then it becomes exaggerated even in their own mind. And part of the illness is not really being able to tell the difference between what is just an emotional betrayal and alienation and what is an actual delusion.
Right, and we all have our own perspective. I mean, each person here will see something, and it will touch them in a separate way, in a different way, even though subtle. It's all different. And with Linda, it was more exaggerated. So and it had direct consequences.
I think you really get a sense of, unlike many films on mental illness, you get a sense as to what is going on in this person's head, what they really are thinking, because you're hearing her words being delivered by Lori in a very empathetic way, as well as you're seeing images of what she may have seen and hearing things she may have heard. But you really get a sense, really, what's going on in her head, you know? Which is unusual. I think that's unusual.
Absolutely. It's fascinating because so often the mentally ill are defined by those who are not judging them or perceiving
or those who are taking care of them, defined.
Yeah, exactly. And it is sort of a new perspective to sort of go inside of that head, for lack of a go inside that head. Excuse me.
It's really an experiential documentary. Her thoughts were really brought to life. I think you all really captured, and I think also as part of the film being in different mediums, because I think all of us sort of think in different ways. When we have an experience, we remember it differently. It's not all exactly the same. And with some people, they seem to have a light around them, and we're attracted to them. And other people, we're sort of afraid of. I think that Linda imbued every symbol with exactly that kind of intensity, and that was part of her illness. That's sort of what that's what sort of took her over. Would you say? Kind
yes.
of, it was that, and they have labels for it, but I think it's a very human trait to feel not necessarily exactly in sync with everyone else.
The other thing too is that you often people with these kind of illnesses tend to isolate, and which makes the illness worse. You know, this woman had bipolar. She was misdiagnosed with other things earlier in her life, but it's pretty clear she had bipolar disease with psychosis. And patients with bipolar tend to isolate, and depression as well tend to isolate. And they push aside friends and loved ones and those that really care about them, and they go inside their heads or inside a house alone for months and just live there by themselves, you know, and that becomes a metaphor for, I think, isolation that occurs with people that have these mental illnesses. So you get a sense of that a little bit if you see the film.
And her not reaching out was key.
Yeah.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, when we started to make this film, we spent a significant amount of time inside the house. We shot in the house for almost 2 full years, almost 8 complete seasons. And, you know, as we said, we really tried to make this an experiential documentary. We wanted people to feel and hear what we thought Linda might have seen, might have heard while she was in that house. You know, she was in that house for 4 months. It was during perhaps the coldest winter on record in New Hampshire. She came in October, and the more time she spent in that house, it became colder and colder and colder. Originally, she had gone out at night. She had picked over 300 apples from an apple orchard in the backyard of the house, and she was collecting water from a brook that ran through the property, and that's what she was living on for that period of time. As the winter set in, it became colder and colder, and her apple supply began to diminish. She went from 300 apples to 200 to 100 to 50 to I have 1 apple left to I haven't eaten in a day, I haven't eaten in 5 days, I haven't eaten in 20 days. And her journey becomes significantly tragic. So capturing what it was that she felt, what she heard, became incredibly important. Yep. So not only through voice, through Laurie, but the soundscape became incredibly important too. All the noises that you hear, the birds you hear through the window, the wind seeping through the cracking windows, those were captured there. And what it's like,
the little bit of company that she had was,
yes,
And
the
she,
soundscape.
yeah, and she
exactly.
also, the family that used to live there became her friends. In her mind, she brought them to life. So she had a complete imaginary, you know, existence there. And it seems in some ways timeless, but it's actually a race against time because her family is her hope for saving her. And she's in this house and she's just living as the time ticks by. And it's just amazing that way also.
You know, the other thing too is we live in a city and we live in a country where there's a lot of homeless people, a lot of very severely mentally ill homeless people, and this is a problem that obviously is not going away. I mean, in our own city of New York, homeless people are all over the place, and throughout cities in our great country, this is the situation. And you don't really often get a sense of what the homeless people are thinking. And Linda Bishop was a severely mentally ill homeless woman. And, you know, you might walk by someone, but how often do you think, what is that person thinking that's homeless that I'm walking by who's asking me for help or sitting on the thing or, you know what I mean? You don't, people often don't think, what's going on in that particular person's head? So in a way, this is an opportunity to see that and hear that for real because we have her words and we know where she was during that period of time, basically. And so we present that in a way that takes the audience on a journey.
How did you pare down her journals? And Laurie, did you read most of the journals, or was it kind of like by the time they got to you, they were like, this is where this is going to go in the film? And
no, I read it over many times, her journals, and I saw, I had many, I both saw and met her family and was in the house, and I did a great deal of preparation also for a great deal of time. And no, her journals were very profound, powerful to me. For many reasons, and Todd and Jedd both picked out the passages they felt were the what they felt told the story, and yet there were many other passages which were equally powerful. It's just it was their decision on how they.
There's sort of two arcs to the film. One is Linda's arc in her own words of the diary, and that was crafted to take you on her journey. And then the other arc is everything around what happened to her. The people that found her body, her friends, her family, anyone that knew her in life or knew her in death. Actually, the people that had seen her last in death, the medical examiner, the policeman that encountered her in the floor where they found her, we interviewed him in the room that she died, actually, and that was the first time they'd been back there. So that was very interesting because it really unleashed a whole series of emotions, I think, in those particular people that were interviewed. But But that was the way the film is structured. It's structured really in 2 arcs that run simultaneously, and occasionally they touch. You know, there's a moment where the homeowners come and they say, they're telling us, the viewers, that, hey, you know, we came to look at the house and it was a little creepy and, you know, something that didn't feel right. And then Linda Bishop is writing and Laurie's reading in the diary, someone came to look at the house today. I was hiding in the attic. You know, basically she's afraid she's going to be caught. And that moment when those 2 arcs touch is like, whoa, you know, and then you get to chill.
It's interesting, Ricky, also, you mentioned Robert Altman's Shortcuts.
Oh yeah, Backstage, it's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, and that has so many moments that just barely intersect. And the moment mentioned also, in this life of this house, the family that used to live there, these journals from this young boy who was in 8th grade and got a grade named Brian, the family that Todd just mentioned coming to the house, the person she picked out, Linda picked out to read look over his paper, was a boy named Brian, and he got a bad grade. And she said, Brian should have gotten a better grade. You know, she was fighting in her mind for this boy's grade.
And then Brian shows up,
Brian
on his
in
house.
real life,
You know, that Brian
was the person. He was the homeowner of that home that had grown up and now drove up to look at the house and check on it, and actually went through the house searching, and didn't see Linda. But the 2 actually physically were in the same space, which is.
I mean, it's really not a typical documentary. Jedd said we produced a lot of these, and it's not a typical documentary fare. It just isn't. You really feel like you're in the moment in that room with her, and that's what we're going for. You know.
Well, in regards to that, how has her family sort of responded to viewing the film? Have they viewed the film? Because it is a much different documentary, as you've said, and I could imagine the experience being a bit more powerful than just sort of a standard retelling of her story.
Yeah, Linda's sister and Linda's daughter both have seen the film. I mean, this obviously for them is an incredibly tragic circumstance. They lost their mother, they lost their sister. When we sat down to make this film, we spent a lot of time with them in the beginning, talking to them about what we wanted to accomplish with this film, how we wanted to shoot it, the sensitivity that we wanted to use with respect to our approach to the film. And they understood that. They both love the film. They think it's a beautiful tribute to their sister, but at the same time, they understand that this story and the way we tell it is not just a story of their loved one, of Linda, but it's a window into a larger issue in our country, which is our nation's approach to how we deal with the severely mentally ill and the homeless, and the fact that a woman like this can fall through the cracks of a broken system, and she's not alone. I mean, there are hundreds of these types of stories that exist all across this country, and why as a society do we continue to let this happen?
The real devastating part of that system is that if she didn't fall through the cracks, in many ways she would end up in prison. Because so often the mentally ill in this country end up in prison,
yes.
And there's very little care for them there. At least the kind of care that would help them get better. It's the kind of care that you get for committing crimes.
That's true.
That's right.
It's a very fine line.
The vast majority of people being treated for mental illness are being treated in prison. Yeah.
But you can look at Linda's journey and you can pinpoint various points during the course of her journey, and you can say if this decision had been made differently, perhaps she might not have ended up here or the way she did. The fact that the hospital released her unconditionally. Why was she released unconditionally? She could have been released, on the condition that the hospital notified the sister or notified the daughter that Linda was being released. They didn't even know that she had been released from the hospital. In fact, the first time they had found out that she had been released from the hospital was when they got a telephone call from the police that her body had been found in an abandoned farmhouse.
What was your biggest struggle in terms of crafting this narrative? Because it's not as if it's totally chronological where, we start with her early on as a mother and then we moved, and then she's in the house. She's in the house from the beginning of the film, and we're sort of dipping back and forth in time to tell different parts of the story. What was your sort of philosophy going into that? How did each one correlate to each other?
Well, we wanted to go in 2 directions time-wise. We wanted to go in the direction from the body backwards. You find the body, like an old classic film like Rashomon, for example, where there's a dead body and then it starts to unfold. How did the body get there? And you start hearing different views. And this film unfolds in a similar way. It begins with the body in a house. And a passerby was walking by, sees a body in the house. What is this? His girlfriend says it's a body, and he says, no, it's a Halloween mask. And she says, no, it's a body. And then you get into it, and the police come, and they start to examine things, and the police are examining and saying, she's murdered. How did she get here? Or did she kill herself? But one cop finds these diaries, and he starts reading them. And he's the one that we follow in this. And that begins to unfold, and then you begin to hear the medical examiner's perspective, and everyone sort of gets a different view of what the truth is. So you get a sense of what the truth is, but you're not exactly sure what is the exact truth. And do we ever know that, you know?
It's interesting because as you're sort of crafting the narrative of that truth and all these people finding out the truth and investigating it, we're hearing her truth at the same time.
That's right.
Over the
and that's the second. That's the second arc. You know, and which is occurring at a different time. That's the time of Linda Bishop in the present, and that begins essentially when she walks into and sees the farmhouse for the first time, and she says, you know, here I am. I found freedom. In reality, she had been discharged from a mental hospital unconditionally, wanders 10 miles away, is homeless for 2 days, finds this farmhouse just randomly, and breaks in and lives there for 4 months of rainwater and apples with no electricity and no heat. That's in reality what was happening. In her head, she thinks, this is Eden. I found my home. You know, this is the home I've been looking for my whole life, and here I am. You know, and obviously this is part of her mental illness that she has, that she thinks that, you know.
And it's so tragic because with assistance, she might have been okay there, but her family never knew where she was. In fact, her sister drove right past the very house in where she was and never knew it. So it really is also a question of civil liberties, you know, protecting someone's rights to have and live their own life, and at the same time, a family's right to take care of someone who needs their help and needs their love and care.
And the other thing too,
there's that whole portion of the documentary that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, where there's the argument from the doctor where it's like, well, this person has said no, they don't want medication, there's nothing that we can do, and then there's somebody else that's saying like, no, look, she can't say whether or not she should be taking medication. And it's like an argument that family members and doctors are still having to this day.
Wrenching, yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting question, right? I mean, do we allow people to commit suicide in our society? You know, if you go up to GW Bridge and say, I'm going to jump, the police come and pull you down, right? They don't say, okay, have a good trip, right? They pull you down and take you to the hospital, hopefully, right? So in a way, this is similar in a way, right? I mean, she decides to essentially starve to death in this house. She didn't plan that, but that's what happened. The other question that's interesting is from one side of the house, it's on 100 acres and it's abandoned. But from the other side of the building, it's on a main road, and there are 3 or 4 houses literally within eyesight. You could watch television on the neighbor across the street from the window where Linda spent most of her time. So why is it that she simply just didn't get up and leave? She could have just walked across the building and she would have been saved. Till the very end where she had no strength because she had essentially starved and there was snow everywhere and she couldn't open the door. Up until that point, there were months during which she could have just gotten up and left.
From her perspective, she didn't want to.
Right.
Well, I think from her perspective, she was not able to. Right. I mean, she didn't have free will. She was severely mentally ill. And she also suffered from paranoid delusions as well. She thought people were after her. They were running after her. And originally, before she even arrived in the house, she thought the Chinese mafia was chasing her. She was severely mentally ill. She was sick.
But you could argue the flip side, you know, and you could say that she didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay there. There's a passage in the diary where she says, you know, this is better than the hospital. I have a bed. I have food. I have a nice place to sleep, I have a pillow, and you're seeing in reality what the pillow and the bed really look like in this building, which has been abandoned for years, and her food are rotting apples, but in her head, she thinks, you know, she's having a great meal and she's gonna be sleeping in a nice bed, you know? But part of her did not want to leave, clearly. She wanted to stay there. So should we allow people like this to make those choices? Should we make those choices for them? Those are some of the questions I think that are raised in the film.
Absolutely. Right here, you have a question?
Hey, so I know like some people that are maybe like stressed or whatever like to escape or just like writing journals just as self-therapy. Do you feel like she was trying to do that? Was she aware that she was mentally ill and maybe that she was actually like maybe helping herself?
I mean, I think we can all answer this. I think it's a great question. It's actually, we've not been asked that before. It's an interesting question. That I think that in a way those diaries were a form of treatment for herself. She was soothing herself, you know, because she's sort of talking to herself in the diary, and she's telling herself things to herself Like we all tell ourselves, you know, hey, I look good today, or I don't look so good, or I better go shave, or I better not shave, or I'm gonna grow. You know what I mean? You wake, I don't like that breakfast. Breakfast tastes bad. You know, we talk to ourselves. I think, at least I do. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know, but you know, most people I think are having communications with themselves, and I think the diary is Linda's way of talking to herself, and in a way, it's sort of soothing her because it becomes her friend and her companion. And she also begins to talk to God in the diary. She begins to pray towards the end. So
I think that's right. I certainly think in a way it gave her comfort. You know, when you read the journal, she has great lucidity throughout a lot of the journal, but there are passages clearly where she is just lacking clarity completely. And you know that she's suffering deeply. But in those passages where she does have great clarity, you know, her observations are amazing. I mean, she was an incredibly artistic woman. She was an art history major, so she saw things very visually. You know, she makes observations of a red robin landing on a lilac branch. You know, she looks up at the sky and talks about, you know, astronomy. She talks about art. She talks about food. I mean, she's filled with life, you know, towards the very beginning and into the middle of her journey in that house. You know, she had grown up working on a farm. So, as Todd said, you know, when she first found this farmhouse, this may have been her Eden. You know, she had always wanted to live in a farmhouse. And she arrives in this farmhouse, it's October, it's fall, the colors are still vibrant. She sees this farmhouse, she breaks in, but soon, you know, the cold sets in, the colors change, it becomes darker, it becomes grayer. The leaves are falling off the trees, the apples are falling off the trees, they're rotting. And things change dramatically, and the house that, you know, historically had been filled with life on its own begins to die around her also. In fact, the house is a character in the film as well.
Next question.
Hi. Thank you guys so much for being here and for doing this. It's obviously a topic that needs more attention than it gets, and more understanding, and you guys all spoke about truth, and it's so interesting to see the truth, like you said, from like the medical examiner's point of view, and then the police officer. That it's fascinating, and you spoke about how what she was experiencing was her truth, and it's just so misunderstood. And from somebody that has learned a lot about mental illness through other people's experiences that are close to me, I'm deeply affected even just hearing about it. So I can kind of understand why people don't want to know more or learn more. And so I think it's so important, and I can't wait to see this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I mean, I think, you know, look, this film may make you a little bit uncomfortable watching it, frankly.
Yeah.
But we made it to make you uncomfortable,
Right.
actually.
Yeah.
Because the story is not comforting, right? This is not a happy ending here.
Yeah.
You know, this is a tragedy, and the fact that she fell through the sort of broken, ever-porous cracks of our social service safety net is a tragedy. But it's also a tragedy that I don't know, as a society, we so often ignore people that are the most vulnerable, and they're taken advantage of, they're mistreated, and they're forgotten often, you know? I mean, she had actually somehow managed to, when 9/11 had happened, and that was a big moment for me. I think this is one of the reasons personally I connected so much to this, is that I was an early volunteer at Ground Zero, and somehow Linda Bishop had managed to go, when 9/11 happened, she managed somehow to get from New Hampshire to New York, and she volunteered at Ground Zero to hand out water bottles, and she was homeless. And there was a picture of her that appeared in the Post or the news, you know, and there's a photo of Linda Bishop, you know, standing there in Ground Zero, and she was called the Angel of Ground Zero. And you know, we did interview one guy that knew her then, briefly spoke about it, but it was a weird detour that she went on. And it just speaks to her humanity as a human being. And it just, you know, who's to say the life of any person is worth more than the life of another person? You know, why is the life of a homeless person worth any less or more than my life? Aren't all those lives worth the same? At least in my mind they are, you know. And they should be treated the same, I think.
And that a human being isn't just one thing.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right, not a label. That's exactly
That's
right.
right.
Like, isn't she more than a homeless, mentally ill person, you know? She still has dreams and hopes and desires and thoughts and, you know. Shouldn't we?
And she had a large spirit. She was also very, under these dire circumstances, so optimistic that each sign, you know, this bird, this flower, this apple, would save her, would give her another sign and lead her in another direction. So she was open in her own perspective. She was open to change.
But I think if you're going to see this film, say to yourself, I'm going to take an hour and a half, I'm going to go on this journey with this person. You know, it's a contemplative, quiet, beautiful, hopefully moving film where you really get insight into a situation and a person that you might not normally get in another kind of film.
I had just one more question, if that's okay. For you as an actor, also being an actor, how is it for you to read her journals and to really go to her truth? How is that for you?
It was very, very powerful. It was tremendously meaningful because here was a real live person and whose words once again lived. She once again comes to life. This once again is the place where she was alive, where she was last alive. And the journal is very interesting because it's written very differently. Certain times it's very rushed, certain times it's very dark and very intense, certain times it's very light, wispy, until it eventually becomes non-existent. There's just blank pages with just almost a date or what looks like it could have been a date. So they're very powerful. Her innermost loves, her innermost desires and dreams are all right here in your hand. And so it was a lot to bring that to life, and I took it very seriously. I worked, I would say, many, many months, maybe over a year, on her, learning everything I could about her. And when I actually recorded the journal, I had not eaten for many days. It was not, when I find when I steep myself in something, everything's not always planned. And in a way, that's why I identified so much with Linda's plight, because she was giving it up, for this journey, whatever it may be. And of course, it was a tragic one. But in this case, I didn't eat for a number of days. There were a number of reasons why, personal reasons in my family and in my own family, which you could see, sort of maybe, another situation where it's just humanity. We all have issues, with family members. And so for 4 or 5 days, that was the case. I had the journal. I'd been working on it. I'd been up. I'd not slept much. And it was very cold in New York. And I went, and I suddenly felt, I can do it. I have a feeling for this now. And I didn't know what came over me, but I went in New York City, and I took my MacBook Pro, and I went to where I knew some people were working on their building, and it was abandoned, and there was no heat. And the door was ajar because of the workmen, and I pushed my way in and went to the back of the building and hid in a closet, and no one knew I was there. And I just had her diary in front of me, and I began recording. And this voice came, and it really was inspired, I feel, by Linda Bishop and by her journey. And that was the moment when I felt that I could actually bring her loves and her desires to life. It was through that, commitment to her, which had taken, as I said, many, many months to find.
And the first time we heard that, I think, Jedd and I, and also Kiko Deguchi, who's the editor, was very powerful, I think, because we had made a purposeful choice not to look for any video of Linda or the way that she actually sounded. And but I think Laurie was able to somehow channel her in a way, and it was very powerful sort of listening to that for the first time. So that's what's in the film.
Guys, it's a beautiful film. You do an incredible job.
Thank you
so much, Ricky.
God Knows Where I Am. How can people see it? When can people see the film?
It opens tomorrow in New York City at Lincoln Plaza Cinema, and then it's opening in Los Angeles a week later, next Friday, and that's going to about 60 cities across the country in theaters. See it in the theater if you can. Check it out in the theater. It'll be on VOD after the theatrical run.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.